All right, hi everybody. Sorry for this late post. I accidentally deleted the other one that I made. So here I am now. So we're going to talk about intervals and transposition today. And it's actually a fairly straightforward thing. It's basically like doing math. There's no right or wrong answer. There is a right or wrong answer. It's definite. So let's hop right to it. The first term you need to know is interval. So that is spelled and it literally means the distance that you have between two notes. All right? So distance between two notes. So how many notes apart is it? And I'm sorry, if I can try and get less glare, I will, but it doesn't seem to be. I'll just avoid the top of the board. All right, so if we look down here, basically it's straight up numbers. If we start at C, right, and we have two C's next to each other, the interval is 1. So you count from the one note to the next note. So from C to C, it's a space of 1. All right? The interval between C and D is 1, 2. So that interval is 2. All right? If we keep going up, between C and E is 3. C and F is a space of 4, right? So you have, in the case of C and E, it goes C, and then we could have an imaginary D right here, and then the E. So 1, 2, 3, right? Same with this next one. We have C, D, E, F, so a space of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty straightforward. Super simple. So between C and G, it's a fifth, or it's an interval of 5. Between C and A, space of 6. Between C and B, space of 7. And then finally, between C and C, it's a space of 8, or an octave. So that's basically how this works. So that is straight up intervals. Now, okay, so now we can add sort of little descriptors to these notes. So if we start, we're going to add the chromatic scale. You know what the actual intervals are, and now we're going to add sort of qualifiers to those intervals and do it chromatically. So if we have C, right, and then we have C again, of course, it's a unison, or 1. I'm going to raise this up. So C and C, just pretend that it's on top of each other, all right? So if we've got C and C right next to each other, like this, pretend they're the same chord, they're in the same spot. It's going to be an interval of 1, right? So you've got C to C, that's 1 note. And so it's 1 note apart, technically, it's 0 notes apart, and we're going to call this a perfect unison, all right? So P1, and we're going to add a little half step count here. All right, so if this is 0 half steps, 0 HS. All right, so no half steps between these two, between C and C. Now, if we go beyond that, and we add in our chromatic scale, so we've got, say, C and D flat together, right? That is then 1 half step apart, right? Which means we've got 1 half step, And we're going to call this, and then the interval itself is C to a D, general D. So that's a second. And since it's the smaller of the two possible seconds, we're going to call it a minor second, just like that. Now if we keep going up the scale, C to D natural, like that, right? We actually have two half steps that go through. So we have C to D flat, right? And then D flat to D natural. So that's two half steps in our half step count. And then that's going to be called a major second because it's the bigger of the two possible seconds that you can have. Now, if we move on, we go to the next interval. So we go C to E flat. You can see that this is just a chromatic scale going up. C, D flat, D, E flat. So what we have here is three half steps going up. And we're going to call this, since it's the smaller of the possible two, a minor third, right? Our interval is a third, C, D, E, 1, 2, 3. And our half steps, we've got three in there. So C to D flat to D natural to E flat. All right, if we keep moving up, it just follows the same pattern. So we have D to E natural, that's the next one. All right, so that's still a third apart, so we put the 3 down, and then it's 4 half steps, right? So we're going to call this one the major third, all right? So it's pretty easy. It's just about counting half steps. And then if our next one, we go on. So C, next half step up from E flat is an F natural, right? So C to F natural. In fact, I'm going to start stacking these on top of each other to make more room. So C to F natural is a fourth apart, right? C, D, E, F, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll put our 4 down. And then we've got 5 half steps separating these two. So C to D flat to D, D to E flat to E, E to F. So it's 5 half steps. And we're going to call this one actually a perfect fourth, all right? We don't have a chromatic interval that's bigger than or smaller than this fourth. We don't really have a minor fourth or a major fourth, and you'll see in a minute why. So when we go up half step past this, there's a very special interval called a tritone. And it was known as the devil's chord in the Renaissance. It was to be avoided at all times because it's so dissonant sounding when you play it together. It sounds really cool. I'll play them for you. So C to F sharp, or C to G flat. All right, so it's the same interval. These two are enharmonics of each other, if you remember our lecture on enharmonics. So the symbol for this is tritone, or TT. And then this is 6 half steps apart, just like that. And you also see this one delineated a little bit. Sometimes you'll see if it's a fourth apart, so in the case of an F sharp, right, you'll see it'll get the 4, and then they'll call it an augmented fourth. Sometimes you'll see it as the 5th, right, so it's a lowered 5th, or G flat, and you'll see it written as diminished 5th. I will accept any of them, all right? So if it's a fourth apart, just remember it's an augmented fourth. If it's a 5th apart, it would be called a diminished 5th if it has 6 half steps. Or the universal that covers both bases, if you're not sure, is just tritone, all right? So our next step is a perfect 5th. So this goes up to G natural. So it's a 5th apart. And since we already have our lowered 5th possibility here in the tritone, it's another perfect interval, P5. And P4, P5, perfect unison, perfect octave. These are the intervals that were used during the medieval period to sing. So this is as sort of harmonic as they would get, these perfect intervals. And they ring like crazy. I mean, if you play a string instrument, chances are it's tuned in fourths and fifths. So it's really obvious when you hear them. It just sort of, everything rings and aligns. It's sort of that moment where you're like, ah, lights come on, birds chirp, all kinds of stuff. Anyway, so this is 7 half steps apart. Just like that. Okie dokie. All right, so now moving on, we move up just another half step to A flat. So G to A flat, it's a 6th apart. C, D, E, F, G, A, right? So then we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is a 6th. And we're back to our major minor delineation. So we've got a minor 6th. And that's 8 half steps. If we keep going to A natural, still a 6th apart, it's 9 half steps, and we call it a major 6th, you guessed it, all right? All right, if we keep going to B flat, just like that, 10 half steps, it's a 7th apart, and since it's the smaller of the 2 possible 7ths, we're going to call it a minor 7th. If we keep going, finish it off. Here we've got B natural, so 11 half steps. Still a 7th apart, right? C, D, E, F, G, A, B. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's still a 7th, but since it's the bigger of the 2, we call it a major 7th. All right, so minor 7th has 10 half steps, major 7th has 12 half steps, or 11 half steps, and then finally, last but not least, if we go from C to C, all right, we have our perfect octave. It's not another major minor, all right? And that is 12 half steps. Got it? So just remember this order. That's the most important part. And remember that perfect unison has 0 half steps. If you start there and then remember that the order is P1, minor 2, major 2, minor 3, major 3, perfect 4th, tritone, perfect 5th, minor 6th, major 6th, minor 7, major 7, perfect 8, you'll have no problem. So just kind of remember this order. Remember that the perfect intervals bookend. So P1, P8 on the extreme, and then they also go right in the middle, right? And it's all built around this weirdo tritone that doesn't really fit in anywhere. So the 2 perfect intervals are here, and then they sort of spread out from there. And I'll show you, they're actually inversions of each other if you play around with them. But let me show you this on the piano real quick.